My rich sister mocked my old pickup truck. She didn't notice my name on the construction site. The day my sister laughed at my old pickup truck was the same day she unknowingly drove past a construction site carrying my name. She didn't know I owned the company building the luxury neighborhood she was trying to impress everyone with. She didn't know the trucks she considered embarrassing were part of a business worth more than she could imagine. And she definitely didn't know that the house she had been bragging about buying was sitting on land my company had developed. But the worst part wasn't that she mocked my truck. It was what she said afterward. She told our entire family that I had wasted my life working with construction crews while she had become the successful daughter our parents could finally be proud of. 3 months later, she walked into my office asking for a favor. She didn't recognize me at first. She only recognized my sister. My name is Claire, and for most of my life, I was the less impressive daughter. At least that's how my family saw me. My older sister Victoria had always been the beautiful one, the ambitious one, the successful one, the daughter who knew how to dress for expensive restaurants and business events. She knew which wine to order. She knew how to talk to wealthy people. She knew how to make an ordinary weekend look like a luxury vacation on social media. I was different. I liked practical things. I liked early mornings. I liked working with my hands. I liked knowing exactly how something was built, and I had never cared much about impressing people. That difference between Victoria and me had existed since childhood. Our parents never said they preferred her. They didn't need to. Everyone could see it. When Victoria won an academic award, my mother called every relative. When I won a regional construction design competition in college, my parents barely mentioned it. When Victoria bought her first luxury car, my father helped her negotiate the financing. When I bought my first used pickup truck, my father asked whether I was sure I could afford the insurance. I noticed. I just stopped expecting them to notice me. After college, I took a job with a small construction company. I started at the bottom. I carried materials. I learned how to read blueprints. I spent freezing mornings standing on unfinished foundations. I learned how contractors negotiated with suppliers. I learned how delays could destroy a project. I learned how one careless decision could cost thousands of dollars. Most importantly, I learned that construction wasn't simply about buildings. It was about planning, timing, contracts, people, money, and trust. After several years, I started managing larger projects. Then I began taking small projects independently. At first, it was terrifying. I had no wealthy family backing me, no investor, no famous last name, no expensive office. I had an old pickup truck, a laptop, a phone, and a savings account that made me nervous every time I looked at it. But I had something else. I knew what I was doing. My first independent project was a small renovation, then another, then a commercial property, then a series of residential developments. I reinvested almost everything. I didn't buy a luxury car. I didn't move into a giant house. I didn't post pictures of expensive vacations. I bought equipment. I hired good people. I bought land. I learned. And slowly, the company grew. I called it Carter Development. I used my last name because I wanted the company to be about the work rather than me. I didn't tell my family much about it. That wasn't because I was ashamed. It was because every time I mentioned business, Victoria found a way to make it sound small. If I told her I had won a contract, she asked whether it was a real contract or just a small local job. If I mentioned buying property, she asked whether I was planning to renovate it myself. If I talked about hiring employees, she reminded me that construction was a difficult industry. She always had a way of making my achievements sound temporary. Meanwhile, Victoria had built a successful career in luxury real estate. She sold high-end homes. Her clients were wealthy. Her social media was filled with expensive kitchens, designer furniture, rooftop parties, and cars that cost more than some houses. She loved telling people that she had built her career through connections. Technically, that was true. Our parents had introduced her to several influential people. They had helped her get her first major clients. They had given her money when she needed it. Victoria didn't see that as help. She saw it as proof that she deserved success. By the time we were both in our 30s, the difference between our lives looked enormous. Victoria drove a luxury SUV. I drove my old pickup. Victoria lived in a gated community. I lived in a modest house near my company's warehouse. Victoria wore expensive watches. I wore a scratched one I had owned for years. From the outside, she looked successful. I looked like someone who worked too hard to afford anything better. And I didn't care. Until the day she decided to make my truck a family joke. It happened at our parents' house during a Sunday lunch. I had driven there directly from a construction site. I was wearing work boots. My jeans had dust on them. My shirt had a small stain from a morning repair. My pickup was parked beside Victoria's brand new luxury SUV. The difference was almost ridiculous. Her SUV was spotless. Mine looked like it had survived a war. There were tools in the back, a ladder, some safety equipment, a stack of paperwork. The passenger seat was covered with rolled-up plans. Victoria walked outside with a glass of wine. She looked at my truck. Then she looked at me. I knew immediately what was coming. She laughed. Not a small laugh, a deliberate one, the kind designed to make sure everyone nearby heard it. She asked whether I was still driving that thing. I didn't answer. I knew there was no point. She walked around the truck like she was inspecting something unpleasant. Then she started talking about how she could never understand people who worked so hard and still refused to upgrade their lives. My mother laughed. My father smiled. I stood there quietly. Victoria pointed toward the truck and said it looked like something a construction worker would drive. That part was technically true. I was a construction company owner. But she didn't know that. Or perhaps she simply didn't consider construction work respectable enough to matter. She told me I should buy something more professional, something that reflected success. I looked at her. Then I looked at my truck. That pickup had carried me through the years when I had almost nothing. It had transported tools during my first contract. It had carried materials when I couldn't afford delivery. It had gotten stuck in mud at 2 a.m. while I was trying to reach a job site. It had carried my first employee to work when his car broke down. It had been there when my company had almost failed. I had replaced almost everything on that truck except the frame. It wasn't beautiful, but it had earned its place in my life. Victoria didn't know any of that. She only saw an old truck. Then she said something that finally made me look directly at her. She said our parents must be disappointed that one daughter had built a sophisticated career while the other was still driving around in a work truck. My mother didn't correct her. My father didn't defend me. That hurt more than Victoria's joke. I simply picked up my keys. I told them I had work to finish. Then I left. I drove home without crying. I wasn't going to give Victoria that satisfaction. But something changed inside me that afternoon. Not anger. Clarity. I realized I had spent years trying to prove that my life was successful without ever admitting that I wanted my family to recognize it. I wanted my father to know I had built something. I wanted my mother to understand that I wasn't the daughter who had settled. And, if I was being honest, I wanted Victoria to realize that she wasn't automatically better than me. But I didn't want to become like her, so I made a decision. I wasn't going to explain myself. I wasn't going to show her my bank statements. I wasn't going to tell her how much my company was worth. I wasn't going to list my properties. I wasn't going to explain how many people worked for me. I would simply keep building. And that's exactly what I did. 6 weeks later, Carter Development closed the biggest deal in the company's history. We had acquired a large piece of undeveloped land outside the city. The plan was to build a luxury residential community, high-end homes, private roads, landscaping, a clubhouse, security, everything. The project was massive. It would take years, but if it succeeded, it would completely change the scale of my company. I personally handled the development. I met with architects, engineers, city officials, investors, contractors, surveyors. Every day was chaos, and I loved it. Then something happened that I never expected. Victoria called me. She sounded excited. She told me she had just received an opportunity to sell several homes in a new luxury development. She didn't know the development was mine. She told me the project was supposed to become one of the most exclusive communities in the region. She said the developer had a strong reputation. I almost laughed. Then she mentioned the name. Carter Development, my company. My sister was trying to get a sales position selling homes in a development I owned. I asked her what she knew about the developer. She said almost nothing. Apparently, the company owner kept a low profile. Victoria said she had heard the owner was young, successful, very private. She described the person as someone who had built the company from scratch. I sat silently on the other end of the phone. She had no idea. Then she told me something else. She wanted my help. She asked whether I knew anyone at Carter Development. I nearly choked. I told her I might know someone. She asked if I could put in a good word for her. I said I would think about it. She thanked me. Then, as if she couldn't help herself, she started talking about how different her career was from mine. She said this development was the kind of project that could finally take her career to the next level. She said selling homes in a luxury community was far more prestigious than managing construction crews. I listened. I didn't tell her. I couldn't. Not yet. The following week, Victoria attended a private presentation for prospective real estate agents. I wasn't there. My project manager handled the meeting. Victoria saw the company logo. She saw the plans. She saw the scale of the development. She was impressed. She apparently told my project manager that the developer had excellent taste. Then she asked who owned the company. My project manager smiled. He told her the owner would be attending the next meeting. Victoria asked whether the owner was a man. He said no. That caught her attention. She asked whether the owner was local. He said yes. She asked whether the owner had a family. He refused to answer. Victoria apparently became fascinated. She wanted to know who was behind the project. She started searching online. She found the company website. There was very little information. No photograph of me, no personal biography, only a company description. Carter Development, founder and managing director, Claire Carter. Victoria saw my name, but she didn't connect it to me. That part still amazes me. She knew my name. She had known it her entire life. But apparently the idea that I could own a major development company never entered her mind. She assumed it was another Claire Carter, someone else, someone successful, someone important, not her sister. Then came the day everything changed. The construction site officially opened. There were dozens of workers, heavy equipment, temporary offices, engineers, architects, inspectors, representatives from banks and investment firms. The entrance had a large sign, Carter Development. Underneath it was the project name, and beneath that, in smaller letters, developed by Claire Carter. I was standing near the entrance wearing a hard hat. My old pickup was parked behind the site office. I had just finished a meeting when I saw a luxury SUV pull through the gate. I recognized it immediately. Victoria. She had been invited to tour the site with several real estate agents. She stepped out wearing designer sunglasses. She looked around. Then she saw the sign. She stopped. I watched her read it. Once, twice, then again. Her face changed. The confident expression disappeared. Her eyes moved from the sign to the site office, then to me. She took off her sunglasses. I didn't move. She stared. I could almost see the thoughts racing through her mind. Claire, Carter, development, the old pickup, the construction site, the sister she had mocked. Everything connected. She slowly walked toward me. For the first time in my life, Victoria looked at me without seeing the little sister she thought she understood. She was looking at the owner of the company. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. I simply waited. She stopped several feet away. Then she looked behind me at the construction site. Hundreds of thousands of dollars of equipment, the architectural models, the project plans, the company employees, and the massive sign with my name on it. Her voice was barely audible when she finally said my name. I told her I was glad she had made it. She stared at me. Then she asked whether this was my company. I said yes. That was all. No speech, no bragging, no revenge. Just one word. Yes. Her face went pale, and then she looked toward my old pickup truck. The same truck she had mocked in front of our parents. The same truck she had called embarrassing. The same truck she had said didn't reflect success. It was parked directly beneath the company sign. And suddenly, she understood something she had never understood about me. I hadn't been driving that truck because I couldn't afford something better. I had been driving it because I didn't need a more expensive vehicle to prove what I had built. Victoria stood there silently, and for once, she had absolutely nothing to say. Victoria stood there silently. For once, she had absolutely nothing to say. I didn't enjoy watching her realize the truth. At least, that's what I told myself. But if I'm being completely honest, there was a small part of me that felt something close to satisfaction. Not because my sister had been embarrassed, because for years she had treated my life like a consolation prize, and now she was standing in the middle of something I had built from nothing. She looked at the sign again, then at me, then back toward the workers moving around the site. She asked how long I had owned Carter Development. I told her I had founded it 7 years earlier. She stared at me. 7 years. She had spent 7 years believing I was simply a woman driving an old pickup truck to construction sites. Meanwhile, I had been building a company. She asked how large the company was. I didn't give her a number. I simply told her we had several active projects. That answer seemed to bother her more than a number would have, because she could have compared a number. She couldn't compare what she didn't understand. Victoria looked around again. Then she noticed the people standing nearby. My project manager, the lead architect, the site engineer, the financial consultant. They all knew me. They weren't treating me like someone who had somehow wandered onto the site. They were waiting for my decisions. I watched Victoria notice that. She had always believed construction workers were people who worked for someone else. She had never understood that someone had to own the projects. Someone had to negotiate the contracts. Someone had to take the risks. Someone had to sign the checks. That person was me. One of the real estate agents accompanying Victoria approached us. She recognized me immediately. She greeted me warmly and asked about the latest timeline. Victoria's expression changed again. She realized that the woman standing beside her wasn't simply my employee. She was one of the people who had been trying to schedule a meeting with me for weeks. Victoria suddenly looked uncomfortable. The agent asked whether I knew Victoria. I said yes. I told her Victoria was my sister. There was a brief silence. Then the agent looked between us. I could tell she had noticed something. Victoria smiled. It was the kind of smile people use when they want to pretend nothing strange has happened. She explained that she had been interested in representing several properties in the development. I told her that was possible. She asked whether I would consider her application. I told her everyone would be evaluated through the same process. Her smile disappeared. She had expected family privilege. I wasn't going to give it to her. Not because I wanted revenge, because I had built the company specifically so personal relationships wouldn't determine professional decisions. Victoria had spent years believing that connections were everything. I had spent years learning that connections without competence were dangerous. The tour continued. I returned to work. Victoria stayed with the group. I could tell she was distracted. Every few minutes, she looked toward me. She watched me speak with contractors. She watched me review plans. She watched employees ask me questions. She watched me walk through the construction site without anyone questioning why I was there. And she finally saw something my family had ignored for years. I wasn't pretending to be successful. I was successful. I just didn't look the way she expected success to look. After the tour, Victoria waited for me. She stood near the parking area. My old pickup was still there. She looked at it differently now. Not with disgust, with confusion. She asked why I still drove it. I told her because it worked. She didn't understand. I could see that. For Victoria, money had always been connected to appearance. A luxury car meant success. A designer handbag meant success. A large house meant success. For me, money had always been connected to freedom. The freedom to hire good people. The freedom to buy land. The freedom to walk away from bad contracts. The freedom to say no. My truck represented something to me that her SUV never could. It represented the years when I had nothing but a plan. I had no reason to throw it away just because I could afford something newer. Victoria asked whether I was angry about what she had said at our parents' house. I told her I had been hurt. She looked surprised. I think she expected me to say I was furious. Instead, I told her the truth. I said the problem wasn't that she mocked my truck. The problem was that she believed the truck told her everything she needed to know about me. She didn't respond. I could see that sentence hit harder than an insult. She asked whether our parents knew. I asked what she meant. She wanted to know whether Mom and Dad knew that I owned the company. I said they knew I had a construction business. She asked whether they knew how successful it was. I said I had never given them the financial details. She looked stunned. Then she asked why. I told her I had stopped trying to impress them a long time ago. That was when Victoria finally looked away. For a moment, I felt sorry for her, because I realized something. She had been trying to impress our parents for her entire life. The expensive clothes, the career, the house, the vacations, the perfect social media posts. Maybe she wasn't trying to prove she was better than me. Maybe she was trying to prove she was worthy of being the daughter they seemed so proud of. I understood that feeling. I had simply chosen a different way to escape it. Victoria apologized. Not dramatically, not emotionally, just quietly. She said she had been wrong about me. I accepted the apology, but I didn't tell her everything was fine. It wasn't. Some things take time. Then she asked whether I would consider allowing her to represent the development. I told her she could apply. She asked whether I would personally recommend her. I said no. Her face fell. I explained that if she was good enough, she wouldn't need my recommendation. If she wasn't, my recommendation wouldn't make her good enough. She didn't like the answer. But she couldn't argue with it. She left. I thought the situation was over. It wasn't. That evening, my mother called. She sounded upset. Victoria had apparently told her everything. My mother asked why I had never told the family how successful my company had become. I almost laughed. I reminded her that I had tried, many times. She said she didn't remember. I told her I remembered. I remembered telling them about my first major contract. I remembered telling them when I bought my first piece of development land. I remembered telling them when I hired my first full-time employee. Every time, the conversation eventually shifted back to Victoria, her clients, her house, her career, her next vacation. My mother became quiet. Then she said something I had heard my entire childhood. She told me Victoria had simply always been more ambitious. I asked her whether ambition was measured by the price of someone's car. She didn't answer. I told her I didn't need an apology. What I needed was for her to stop comparing us. She said she didn't compare us. I reminded her that she had spent my childhood doing exactly that. Another silence. Then she asked whether I would invite them to the opening ceremony for the development. I almost said no, but I changed my mind. I told her they could come. Not because I needed their approval, because I was finally proud of what I had built. A month later, the first phase of the development was ready for its public launch. The roads were finished. The landscaping had started. The first model homes were complete. There were investors, real estate agents, local officials, business partners, media. My parents arrived together. Victoria came too. This time she wasn't laughing at my truck. She was standing beside it. I had deliberately parked it near the entrance. Not as a joke, not as revenge, simply because it was still my vehicle. The same truck, the same scratches, the same worn interior. It had carried me through the years when nobody believed in my company, and now it was parked beside a development worth millions. Victoria noticed it. She smiled faintly. Then she walked over. She said something that surprised me. She said she finally understood why I kept it. I asked why. She said because the truck remembered the person I was before everyone started noticing the results. I looked at her. That was probably the most insightful thing she had ever said to me. I told her she was right. Then she asked whether I had ever considered selling it.
I said maybe someday, but not yet.
The event went well. Our parents toured the model homes. My father looked impressed. My mother kept asking questions. For the first time, they were looking at something I had built without comparing it to something Victoria had done. At one point, my father pulled me aside. He said he was proud of me. Those words should have meant everything. Instead, they felt complicated. I thanked him. Then I told him I had wanted to hear that years ago. He looked down. He said he was sorry. I accepted it. But I didn't pretend the past hadn't happened. Later that evening, Victoria approached me again. She told me the real estate division had accepted her application. I hadn't known. I congratulated her. She said she had earned it. I smiled. She had. That was important. She hadn't received the opportunity because she was my sister. She had earned it because she had been good enough. And for the first time, I think she understood why that mattered to me. We stood together looking at the development. The sun was setting behind the unfinished buildings. Workers were still moving equipment. The air smelled like fresh concrete and soil. Victoria looked at the giant company sign. Then she looked at my pickup. She said she had spent years thinking success meant having things other people could see. I told her I used to think that too. Then I learned that the best kind of success was the kind nobody noticed until you no longer needed them to. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. The next few months changed our relationship. Victoria became one of the agents selling homes in the development. At first, I worried that it would create problems. It didn't. She worked hard. She showed up on time. She treated clients well, and she never once used our relationship to get special treatment. If anything, she became more demanding of herself. She wanted to prove that she deserved the position. Eventually, she became one of the top-performing agents on the project. I was proud of her, but I didn't tell her immediately. I wanted her success to belong to her, not to our family, not to me, not to the comparison we had grown up with, to her. One afternoon, several months after the launch, Victoria arrived at my office. She knocked. I told her to come in. She was holding a folder. She placed it on my desk. It was a proposal for a new development. She had found an opportunity, a piece of land, a potential project. She wanted to start something of her own. I read through the proposal. It wasn't perfect, but it was good, very good. I looked up. She asked whether I thought she could do it. I told her I did. Then she asked whether I would invest. That question caught me off guard. I told her I would consider it, But there would be conditions. She would have to put her own money into it. She would have to take responsibility for the project. She would have to accept that I would say no if the numbers didn't work. And most importantly, she would have to stop thinking of me as her little sister. She would have to treat me as a business partner. She smiled. Then she agreed. The project became our first joint venture. It wasn't easy. We argued, we disagreed, we almost walked away from the deal twice, but we learned something. We were actually good at working together. Victoria understood the market. I understood development. She knew how to sell. I knew how to build. For years we had been competing because our parents had convinced us there was only room for one successful daughter. In reality, there had always been room for both of us. The person who needed to learn that most was me. I had spent so long trying not to be compared to Victoria that I had forgotten she was also trapped inside the same family dynamic. We had both been measured against each other. She responded by becoming obsessed with appearances. I responded by becoming obsessed with proving I didn't need anyone. Neither of us was completely free. Until we stopped competing. Years later, my old pickup is still sitting in my driveway. It has more scratches now. The paint is faded. The seats are worn. I've had plenty of opportunities to replace it. I just haven't. Every time I start the engine, I remember the woman I was when I bought it. She didn't know whether her business would survive. She didn't know whether anyone would take her seriously. She didn't know whether her family would ever be proud of her. But she kept going anyway. And now, whenever someone asks why I still drive an old pickup despite owning a successful construction company, I give them the simplest answer. Because it works. But that's not the whole truth. I keep it because it reminds me that success doesn't always arrive looking expensive. Sometimes it arrives covered in dust. Sometimes it has scratches. Sometimes it smells like gasoline and concrete. Sometimes your family laughs at it. And sometimes, years later, you park that same old truck beneath a giant sign with your name on it. Then the people who underestimated you finally understand. You weren't behind them. You were simply building something they couldn't see yet. The first time Victoria came to my office after our joint venture started, she looked completely different from the woman who had once laughed at my truck. Not because she was dressed differently, not because she suddenly stopped caring about expensive things. She still wore beautiful clothes. She still drove her luxury SUV. She still enjoyed the occasional expensive dinner. The difference was that she no longer needed those things to prove she was better than me. That changed everything between us. Our first joint project wasn't easy. In fact, it nearly destroyed our relationship again. The property was an older commercial site that we planned to convert into a mixed-use development. The numbers looked excellent on paper. The location was strong. The surrounding area was growing. The city had approved the preliminary plans. But during the early inspection, my engineering team found something that could completely change the project. The soil beneath part of the property was contaminated. Not severely enough to make development impossible, but badly enough that remediation would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Victoria was furious. She believed the previous owner had hidden the problem. I agreed, but anger wasn't going to fix it. We had to decide whether to walk away or renegotiate. Victoria wanted to walk. I wanted to negotiate. We argued for almost 2 hours. At one point, she reminded me that she was the reason we had found the property. I reminded her that I was the one who would be responsible for construction. The argument became personal. For a few minutes, we were 13 and 15 again. She was the favorite daughter. I was the difficult one. She was successful. I was stubborn. She wanted to win. I wanted to prove she was wrong. Then we stopped. We looked at each other, and both of us realized what was happening. We weren't arguing about the property anymore. We were arguing about our childhood. That moment changed the project. Instead of trying to win, we started solving the problem. Victoria went back to the seller. I went back to the engineers. She renegotiated the purchase price. I redesigned part of the construction plan. We brought in environmental specialists. We spent weeks fixing a problem that neither of us had caused. And eventually, we made the numbers work. The project launched 2 years later. It became one of our most profitable investments. But the money wasn't the part I remember most. I remember standing beside Victoria at the opening. She looked at the building, then she looked at me. She told me she never would have imagined us working together when we were younger. Neither would I. She said our parents had made us believe we had to compete. I told her they didn't do it alone. We had both participated. She nodded. That was the first time we had ever admitted that. We weren't innocent victims of our childhood. We had both contributed to the distance between us. Victoria had mocked me. I had withdrawn. She had competed. I had become defensive. She had chased approval. I had chased independence. We had both spent years proving something to people who weren't even watching as closely as we thought. Our parents eventually changed too. Not overnight. There was no dramatic family meeting, no tearful apology that fixed everything. Real life rarely works that way. Instead, small things changed. My mother started asking about my projects. My father started reading the reports I sent him. They stopped describing Victoria as the successful daughter and me as the hardworking one. They simply started talking about us as their daughters. It sounds small. It wasn't. For me, it was enormous, because for most of my life, I had secretly wanted one thing. I wanted to be seen. Not admired, not envied, not praised publicly, just seen. I wanted someone to look at the things I had built and understand that they mattered to me, and eventually my parents did. But by then, I had learned something important. Their approval wasn't necessary anymore. That made it easier to accept. There was one final moment that brought everything full circle. It happened almost 4 years after Victoria had mocked my truck. We were having another family gathering at our parents' house. I arrived in the same pickup. Older now, much older. The engine had been rebuilt, the interior had been repaired, but the body still carried the scars. Victoria arrived a few minutes later. She parked her new SUV beside me. She had upgraded again. Of course she had. I teased her about it. She laughed. Then she walked toward my truck. She placed her hand on the hood. She said she remembered the first time she had laughed at it. I told her I remembered too. She said she had been embarrassed by how she acted. I told her she didn't need to keep apologizing. She said she wasn't apologizing for the truck. She was apologizing for the person she had been. That meant more. We stood there quietly. Then she asked me something unexpected. She asked whether I remembered what I had been doing the day she mocked me. I told her I had been finishing a construction inspection. She said she remembered something else. She remembered that I had left the family lunch without defending myself. She said she had interpreted my silence as weakness, but now she understood it differently. I asked how. She said I had simply known I didn't need to argue. I smiled. That was probably the biggest compliment she had ever given me. Because she was right. I didn't need to argue. I didn't need to prove my company was successful. I didn't need to show her my financial statements. I didn't need to explain how much land I owned. I didn't need to tell her that the development she had admired was mine. The work had already spoken. And that was the lesson I carried with me. People will judge you based on what they can see. They will look at your clothes, your car, your house, your job title, your social media. They will make assumptions. Sometimes even your family will do it. But you don't have to spend your life correcting every assumption. Sometimes the best response is simply to keep building, keep learning, keep improving, keep moving. Because there will eventually come a day when the thing you built becomes impossible to ignore. And when that day comes, you don't need revenge. You don't need to humiliate anyone. You don't need to say, "I told you so." You can simply stand there, let them see. That was what happened with Victoria. She didn't need to be destroyed for me to succeed. She didn't need to lose her career. She didn't need to apologize in front of everyone. She simply needed to understand that my life had never been smaller than hers. It had just looked different. And maybe that's why I never sold the truck. Not because it was valuable. It wasn't. Not because it was beautiful. It definitely wasn't. I kept it because every scratch reminded me of something. A difficult project, a long night, a failed deal, a lesson, a risk, a person who believed in me, a time when I almost quit, and a time when I kept going. The truck became a timeline of my life. My company grew, my properties grew, my bank account grew, but the truck stayed. It reminded me of the woman who started everything with almost nothing, and I never wanted to forget her. Because if I ever became obsessed with looking successful, I could end up becoming the very person I once resented. Someone who judged people by appearances. Someone who thought expensive things made someone important. Someone who believed a person's value could be measured from the outside. I didn't want that. I wanted to remember that the woman who built Carter Development wasn't the woman in the expensive office. She was the woman covered in dust. The woman who slept 4 hours before a major inspection. The woman who drove through storms to check construction sites. The woman who signed contracts with shaking hands. The woman who had no guarantee that anything would work. And yes, she was the woman driving the old pickup truck, the same truck Victoria once called embarrassing. Years later, when the company celebrated its 10th anniversary, we held a small event at our headquarters. There were employees, investors, partners, friends, family. Someone had arranged a display of photographs showing the company's history, the first warehouse, the first project, the first office, the first major development. And there it was, a photograph of my old pickup parked beside the company's first construction site. It was covered in mud. There were tools sticking out of the bed. The windshield was dirty. The truck looked terrible. Everyone laughed when they saw it, even me. Victoria stood beside the photograph. She looked at it for a long time. Then she turned toward me. She said that truck deserved its own plaque. I laughed. I told her she was ridiculous. She said she was serious. The next morning, I arrived at the office and found something taped to the windshield. A small, handwritten note. It said, "For the truck that got her here." I knew immediately who had written it. Victoria. I kept the note. I still have it. Because somewhere along the way, my sister finally understood something. The truck had never been the embarrassing part. The embarrassing part was believing she knew my worth simply by looking at it. And I had made my own mistake too. I had spent too many years believing I needed to prove my worth because my family didn't recognize it. I didn't. Neither did Victoria. Neither did my parents. My worth existed long before any company, contract, property, or bank account. The business simply gave me a place to put it. Today, Carter Development is larger than I ever imagined. Victoria has built a successful career of her own. Our parents are older. Our relationship is far from perfect, but it is real. And every once in a while, Victoria still makes fun of my truck. The difference is that now she does it while asking whether she can borrow it, and I always say no. Not because I'm angry, because she drives like a maniac. She hates that answer. I love it. And maybe that's what healing actually looks like. Not forgetting what happened. Not pretending the past never hurt. Just reaching a point where the memory doesn't control you anymore. The day my sister mocked my old pickup truck, she thought she was looking at proof that I hadn't succeeded. She was wrong. She was looking at the vehicle that had carried me through every difficult year. She just didn't know what it was carrying yet. It was carrying my plans, my risks, my failures, my determination, and eventually, my name. Because sometimes, the people who underestimate you aren't seeing your failure. They're simply arriving too early to see the finished building. Looking back, I realize my sister never really hated my old pickup truck. She hated what she thought it represented. She thought it represented a woman who hadn't made it. But that truck carried me through every difficult year, every failed deal, every early morning, and every moment when I had no guarantee that my company would survive. It carried me until my name was finally impossible to overlook. Victoria once believed success had to look expensive. I learned that real success doesn't always make noise. Sometimes it looks like an old pickup covered in dust. Sometimes it looks like working while nobody is watching. And sometimes, the best revenge isn't making the people who doubted you feel small. It's building something so meaningful that you no longer need their approval. My sister laughed at my truck because she thought she knew my story. She didn't. She had only seen the beginning. She never noticed the name on the construction site, but I did. And every time I see it, I remember the same thing. Never judge someone's life by what they drive. You might be looking at the person who is about to build something with their name on it.